February 15th, 1944. 9:25 a.m. 20,000 feet above Monte Cassino, Italy. The roar of the engines is deafening, a constant thunder that vibrates through your bones. Captain John Wilkins grips the controls of his B-17 Flying Fortress, the wind whistling past the plexiglass nose as the bomber slices through the cold, crisp air. Below, the ancient abbey clings to the mountaintop like a defiant crown, its stone walls gleaming in the morning light, oblivious to the storm about to break. The bombardier, Lieutenant Mike Rizzo, peers through the Norden bomb sight, his breath fogging the glass. "Steady, steady," he murmurs, the crosshairs locking on the target. The flak bursts begin, black puffs of smoke erupting around them like angry clouds, shrapnel rattling against the fuselage. One hit could send them spiraling. You can almost feel the freezing wind seeping through the cracks, the tension in the crew's voices over the intercom as they call out enemy fighters circling like wolves. "Bandits at 3 o'clock," the tail gunner shouts. Machine guns chatter to life. This is it, the moment that will shatter 1,000 years of history in a hail of high explosives. And as the bomb bay doors creak open, the world below holds its breath. But to understand why this one plane, this one mission would change everything, we have to go back. Back to the bloody stalemate that turned a sacred monastery into a symbol of unbreakable resistance. The Abbey of Monte Cassino, founded in 529 AD by Saint Benedict himself, had stood through centuries of wars, earthquakes, and invasions. It was a beacon of faith, a repository of priceless manuscripts and art, perched 1,700 feet above the Liri Valley. But in the winter of 1943-44, it became something else. A pawn in the brutal chess game of World War II. The German Wehrmacht, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, had dug into the Gustav Line, a formidable defensive barrier stretching across the Italian peninsula, designed to halt the Allied advance toward Rome. And at its heart was Monte Cassino, the mountain that commanded the valley like a watchful sentinel. The Allies, American, British, Polish, New Zealanders, Indians, French, had been grinding against this line for months. The first battle began on January 17, 1944, with American troops from the II Corps wading across the icy Rapido River under withering machine gun fire. Sergeant Bill Malden, the famous cartoonist who served with the 45th Infantry Division, described it as hell frozen over. The water was chest-deep, the mud sucked at their boots, and the German 88mm guns rained death from the heights. "You could hear the screams over the artillery," one veteran recalled. The attack faltered, with thousands cut down in the open fields. The 36th Division alone lost over 2,000 men in 48 hours. It was a slaughter, a reminder that frontal assaults against entrenched positions were suicide. Then came the second battle, starting February 11th. This time, the British X-Corps and New Zealand Corps led the charge, with Indian troops scaling the steep slopes under cover of darkness. Private Raj Singh of the 4th Indian Division remembered the climb. "The rocks were sharp as knives, and the German snipers picked us off like pigeons. We carried our wounded on our backs, slipping in the rain, praying to our gods for dawn." They reached the monastery walls, but the Germans had turned the ruins around it into a maze of pillboxes and minefields. Paratroopers from the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, elite troops known as the Green Devils, held the line with fanatical zeal. They had orders from Hitler himself: fight to the last man. The fighting was hand-to-hand, bayonets and grenades in the dark. The Indians captured Point 593, a key ridge, but lost it in a counterattack. The New Zealanders bombed the town of Cassino below, turning it into rubble, but the Germans used the debris as cover. By February 18th, the assault had stalled again with over 3,000 casualties. The mountain was unbreakable, or so it seemed. Whispers began in the Allied command tents. Was the abbey itself being used by the Germans? Spotters reported seeing flashes from the towers, perhaps artillery observers. General Mark Clark, commander of the 5th Army, agonized over the decision. The abbey was a cultural treasure, but lives were being lost. "If the Germans are in there, we have no choice," he said. But were they? The Germans had publicly promised not to fortify the monastery, and post-war evidence would confirm they kept their word. The abbey was empty of troops until after the bombing. But in the fog of war, fear and frustration won out. On February 14th, leaflets were dropped warning the monks to evacuate. Abbot Gregorio Diamar and a handful of civilians fled, carrying what relics they could. The stage was set for destruction. Back in the sky, Wilkins B-17 is part of the first wave, 142 heavy bombers thundering in from the south. The plane, nicknamed Heaven's Gate, is laden with 500-pound bombs. Its crew a mix of kids from Brooklyn, Texas farms, and Chicago streets. Rizzo, the bombardier, is Italian-American, his grandparents from Naples. "This feels wrong," he confides to the navigator. "That's our heritage down there. But orders are orders." The lead plane signals and the formation aligns. Flak intensifies, the sky darkening with bursts. A nearby B-17 takes a direct hit, its wing shearing off in a fireball. "God, no," Wilkins mutters, banking slightly to avoid the debris. The crew's hearts pound. The fear is palpable, the smell of sweat and cordite filling the cabin. You can imagine the prayer on their lips as the bomb bay doors open wide. At 9:45 a.m., the bombs begin to fall. Rizzo releases the load, watching as the string of explosives arcs toward the abbey. The first hits strike the roof, exploding in a cascade of stone and dust. Wave after wave follows, B-25 Mitchells and B-26 Marauders adding to the inferno, dropping over 500 tons in total. The mountain shakes. The abbey crumbles like a sandcastle under a wave. Towers collapse, walls cave in, the basilica vanishes in smoke. From the ground, the monks watch in horror, crossing themselves as centuries of history are erased in minutes. "It was like the end of the world," one survivor said. The Germans, positioned just outside the monastery walls, are stunned but quick to adapt. As the dust settles, they move into the ruins, turning the rubble into an even stronger fortress. The bombing, meant to break the line, has backfired, creating perfect cover for machine guns and snipers. But in that moment, as Wilkins' plane turns for home, the crew believes they've done it. They've ended the stalemate, destroyed the fortress that ground troops couldn't touch. Little do they know, the real fight is just beginning. The rubble will claim more lives, the mountain will hold for 3 more months. And the cost of this decision will haunt the Allies forever. What seemed like a turning point was only the prelude to greater tragedy. Was this the blow that finally cracked the Gustav line? Or did it seal the fate of thousands more? The answer lies in the battles that followed, where courage and carnage would collide in the shadow of the ruined abbey. March 17, 1944. Dawn. The slopes of Monte Cassino. The mountain is unrecognizable. Where once a majestic white abbey crowned the peak, now there is only a jagged crater of shattered stone, twisted iron, and smoldering timber. Dust still hangs in the air like a funeral shroud. From the valley floor, the ruins look almost lunar, gray, lifeless, and utterly alien. You can almost taste the pulverized masonry on the wind, a chalky bitterness that clings to the back of your throat. But something is moving in the rubble. German Fallschirmjäger, paratroopers of the 1st Division, scramble over the broken walls like ghosts emerging from a grave. Oberleutnant Hans Meller, a wiry veteran from Berlin with ice-blue eyes, directs his men with sharp whispers. "Schnell! Machine guns here, here, and here!" They drag MG-42s into freshly carved firing slits, stack ammunition crates behind fallen columns, and wire trip mines through the debris. What the bombs intended to destroy has become the perfect defensive position. Waist-high walls for cover, endless fields of fire down every approach, and a labyrinth that only the defenders know. The abbey is dead. Long live the fortress. Below, in the forward positions of the 4th Indian Division, Captain David Fraser stares up through binoculars, his face smeared with mud and exhaustion. "Bloody hell," he mutters to his sergeant. "We've given Jerry the strongest position on the entire line." The realization spreads like frost through the Allied ranks. The bombing didn't clear the way. It handed the Germans a gift wrapped in 500 tons of high explosive. The third battle begins on March 15, 1944, exactly 1 month after the destruction of the abbey. This time, It's the New Zealand Corps under Lieutenant General Bernard Freyberg that shoulders the burden. Freyberg, a towering figure with a Victoria Cross from Gallipoli, had argued fiercely for the bombing. Now he must prove it was worth the price. His plan: saturate the town of Cassino with artillery, then send in the 2nd New Zealand Division and the 4th Indian Division to seize the heights in a coordinated night assault. The barrage opens at 8:30 a.m. on the 15th. Over 700 guns roar in unison, a sound so immense that men miles away feel it in their chests. Shells scream overhead, detonating in cascades of fire across the mountain. Private Tom Wells of the Essex Regiment, supporting the Kiwis, remembers the ground shaking like a giant was stomping his foot. For 12 hours the bombardment continues, turning Cassino town into a moonscape of craters and collapsed buildings. When it finally lifts, the infantry moves forward under a creeping barrage. The New Zealanders, tough, no-nonsense men from Auckland and Christchurch, push into the ruins of the town street by street, house by house, room by room. Every pile of bricks hides a sniper, every cellar an MG nest. Sergeant Charlie Upham, already a double VC winner, leads from the front again, tossing grenades into bunkers with deadly precision. But the cost is staggering. Tanks of the 19th Armored Regiment bog down in the craters, easy targets for hidden anti-tank guns. Shermans brew up one after another, their crews scrambling out burning. Higher up, the Gurkhas of the 4th Indian Division climb toward Monastery Hill once more. Rifleman Lachaman Gurung and his section creep through the darkness, kukris glinting at their sides. They reach the lower slopes, only to trigger a storm of fire from the new German positions. Bullets ricochet off the rocks like angry hornets. Grenades roll down the hillside, exploding in orange flashes. The Gurkhas dig in, but every yard gained costs blood. By March 19th, the attack has bogged down completely. The New Zealanders hold parts of Cassino Town, Hangman's Hill, the Castle Hill, the Continental Hotel turned into a strongpoint, but the route to the monastery remains blocked. The Indians cling to precarious ledges just below the summit, under constant counterattack. Casualties mount, over 1,500 in 4 days. Freyberg calls a halt. The third battle ends in another grim stalemate. In the command caravans, recriminations fly. American General Mark Clark fumes privately in his diary. The bombing of the Abbey was a mistake. It has given the Germans a better position than they had before. British officers whisper that Freyberg's insistence on the airstrike prolonged the agony. The press back home, fed selective briefings, still speaks of softening up the enemy. But the men on the ground know the truth. The rubble has become the real fortress, one the Italians couldn't destroy in centuries of siege, and now one the Allies can't conquer. Winter loosens its grip. Spring rain turns the slopes to mud. The wounded lie in gullies for days, calling out in the night. Medics risk everything to reach them under Red Cross flags that the Germans sometimes respect, and sometimes don't. The stench of death mingles with the scent of wildflowers beginning to bloom in the valley, and still the mountain holds. But a new force is gathering. Exiled soldiers who have waited years for this moment. Men who have lost their country, their homes, everything. Men who will not stop until the Abbey ruins fly their flag, or they die trying. Who are these soldiers willing to pay any price for a pile of broken stones? And will their sacrifice finally break the unbreakable? May 11, 1944. 4 a.m. The forward assembly area near the Rapido River. Rain falls in cold sheets, drumming on steel helmets and turning the ground into a quagmire. Hundreds of men stand in silence, shoulder to shoulder, their breath visible in the pre-dawn chill. They wear British battle dress, but the insignia on their shoulders tells a different story. A white eagle on a red shield. These are soldiers of the Polish II Corps, over 50,000 strong exiles who have marched across continents to reach this moment. Lieutenant the Ladislaw Anders, no relation to the Corps commander, adjusts the strap of his Sten gun and stares toward the black silhouette of Monte Cassino. He is 28, thin, with eyes that have seen too much. In 1939, he fought the Germans at Warsaw. Then the Soviets took him prisoner, sent him to the gulags of Siberia. He dug coal in sub-zero hell until 1941, when Stalin released the Poles to fight again, this time as allies. They crossed the Caspian Sea, trekked through Persia, Palestine, and Egypt. Many died along the way. Now, here they are, facing the mountain that has humiliated every army sent against it. Beside him, Corporal Jan Kowalski whispers the words every man in the Corps knows by heart. We swore an oath. From the ashes of Monte Cassino, the road to Poland leads. General Władysław Anders, their commander, has made it personal. In briefings he tells them, the Germans stand between us and our homeland. Take that mountain, and we take the first step toward Warsaw. The Poles have waited 5 years for revenge. They will not be denied. The fourth and final battle, Operation Diadem, begins across the entire Gustav Line at 11 p.m. on May 11th. Over 1,000 guns open fire from Cassino to the sea, a thunderous overture that shakes the earth. The French Expeditionary Corps on the right tears into the mountains with Moroccan Gummiers scaling cliffs like mountain goats. The British 13 Corps crosses the Rapido farther downstream. But the decisive thrust, the one meant to crack the spine of the defense, is here at Cassino entrusted to the Poles. At 5:45 a.m., the 3rd Carpathian Division moves out. The 1st Carpathian Rifle Brigade heads for Point 593, Massacre Hill, as the earlier attackers called it, while the 2nd Brigade aims straight for the monastery ruins. They advance in single file through minefields, engineers ahead with detectors sweeping the mud. The first casualties come quickly. A hidden shoe mine explodes, shredding a man's leg. Medics rush forward under fire. No one stops. By mid-morning, the Carpathians reach the lower slopes. German artillery finds the range. 88s and 105s plaster the approaches with high explosive. Shell fragments whine through the air like hornets. Sergeant Tadeusz Julian climbs with his squad, hugging the ground each time the earth erupts. Keep moving, he shouts. For Poland. They answer with a roar that carries over the gunfire. Night falls on May 12th without the summit taken. The Poles dig in on the forward slopes, just meters from German positions. The fighting becomes intimate. Grenades lobbed over boulders, bayonet thrusts in the dark. Private Zofia Lesniak, one of the few women serving as a frontline medic, crawls from wound to wound, dragging men to safety while bullets snap overhead. She will earn the Cross of Valor for this night. The first assault fails. Point 593 changes hands twice, then remains German. The monastery stays out of reach. Casualties are heavy, over 900 in 48 hours. In the rear, General Anders receives the reports grim-faced. He knows the world is watching. If the Poles fail, the mountain may never fall. But they will try again. On May 16th, the Corps commander meets with his divisional generals under a camouflage tent. Maps cover the table, marked with red arrows and blue casualty figures. Anders speaks quietly. We attack again at dawn on the 17th. This time, both divisions together straight up the center. No withdrawal. No retreat. The officers nod. There is no need for speeches. Every man understands. The night of May 16th to 17th is eerily calm. A full moon bathes the mountain in silver light. Polish soldiers write last letters home, pin photographs inside their helmets, share cigarettes. Chaplains move among them hearing confessions. Someone begins to sing the old anthem, Rota. We will not forsake the land from whence our people came. Voices join until the entire forward line is singing softly, defiantly, across no man's land. Even the Germans listen in silence. At 6 a.m. on May 17th, the final push begins. The Carpathians surge forward again, this time with tanks of the 4th Armored Regiment grinding up the narrow tracks in support. Sherman flails detonate mines ahead of the infantry. The Poles move like a tide, wave after wave, accepting losses, closing the distance. Point 593 falls at 9:30 a.m. after savage hand-to-hand fighting. The survivors press on toward the monastery. Higher up, the 5th Kresowa Division joins from the left, attacking Phantom Ridge and Col Sant Angelo. Everywhere the white and red pennants appear on captured bunkers. The Germans fight desperately. Fallschirmjäger Major Rudolf Boehmler rallies his men for counterattack after counterattack. But exhaustion and ammunition shortages begin to tell. By late afternoon, the Poles are on the summit slopes. Lieutenant Kazimierz Gerbiel leads a platoon through the rubble of the abbey itself, stepping over shattered frescoes and broken statues. A German machine gun opens up from behind a fallen wall. Gerbiel charges, firing his Sten from the hip, silencing it. His men follow, clearing cellars and craters one by one. At 10:20 a.m. on May 18, 1944, a bloodied Polish flag rises over the ruins of Monte Cassino. The mountain has fallen, but the cost is staggering. The Polish II Corps suffers 4,199 casualties in 12 days of fighting, 923 killed, 2,931 wounded, 345 missing. Entire companies are wiped out. The survivors stand amid the stones, some weeping openly, others simply staring at the flag snapping in the wind. From the valley, Allied troops watch the signal flares burst red and green, the prearranged sign of victory. Cheers echo across the Leary Valley. The Gustav Line is broken at its strongest point. Within days, the Germans begin a withdrawal toward the Hitler Line farther north. The road to Rome lies open. Yet for the Poles, triumph is bittersweet. They have kept their vow. They have taken the forgotten fortress that Italians, Americans, British, Indians, and New Zealanders could not. But Poland itself remains enslaved, now under Soviet domination. Many of these men will never see home again. As the sun sets on May 18th, buglers sound the Polish reveille from the ruined abbey. The notes carry down the mountain, mournful and proud. You can almost hear the ghosts of centuries listening, the monks, the medieval knights, the soldiers of a dozen forgotten wars, all bearing witness to the day one plane's bombs turned an ancient sanctuary into the bloodiest battlefield of the Italian campaign. And in the end, it took not technology, not overwhelming air power, but raw human will to finish what that single mission began. But what happened to the men who flew that fateful bombing run? And how did the world judge the destruction of a cultural treasure when the dust finally settled? Church bells ring out across Rome for the first time in 9 months of occupation. American troops of the 88th Infantry Division roll into the Piazza Venezia in jeeps and tanks, greeted by crowds waving Allied flags and throwing flowers. Women embrace GIs in the streets. Old men weep openly. Mark Clark, riding in an open command car, allows himself a tight smile. Rome, the first Axis capital to fall, is his. But even as the victory parades begin, a shadow lingers over the triumph. For days earlier, on the blood-soaked slopes of Monte Cassino, the Polish flag had been raised. The breach the Poles carved allowed the U.S. Fifth Army and British Eighth Army to pour through the Leary Valley, outflanking the Gustav Line and forcing Kesselring into full retreat. Without Cassino's fall, Rome might have waited weeks or months longer. Yet Clark's dash to the capital, diverting forces north instead of cutting off the retreating Germans, lets 10 Wehrmacht divisions escape to fight again. Historians will argue for decades whether vanity cost the Allies a chance to end the Italian campaign sooner. Far behind the cheering crowds, on the ruined mountaintop, the reckoning is quieter. Captain John Wilkins, the pilot who led the first wave over the Abbey on that fateful February morning, stands now among the stones. He has flown 25 missions since, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, but something drew him back. A jeep brought him up the newly cleared road this morning. He walks alone through the craters, boots crunching on fragments of medieval frescoes and shattered marble. The air still smells faintly of cordite and dust. He finds the spot where the basilica once stood, now just a gaping hole ringed by broken columns. Wilkins, a devout Catholic from Boston, removes his cap and stands in silence. "I'm sorry," he whispers to no one. To the monks, to history, to the dead on both sides. Lieutenant Mike Rizzo, his bombardier that day, never made it back to see this. His B-17 was shot down over Austria 2 months later. The entire crew lost. Wilkins carries Rizzo's last letter in his pocket, the one confessing how dropping those bombs on the Abbey felt like betraying his own blood. The world's judgment comes swiftly. Newspapers that once praised the necessary destruction now print photographs of the obliterated monastery under headlines like "Tragic Error" and "Cultural Catastrophe." Vatican Radio laments the loss of irreplaceable manuscripts, though most had been evacuated beforehand. Art historians mourn the frescoes by Gazzoli and the ancient library. In neutral countries, propaganda mills churn out stories of Allied barbarism. Goebbels himself calls it proof of the cultural bankruptcy of the plutocratic bombers. Yet the military inquiry, conducted quietly in 1945, clears the commanders. Freiberg testifies that he acted on the best intelligence available, reports of German observers in the Abbey, even though later evidence proves those reports mistaken. Clark states the decision saved lives in the long run. The official line: a regrettable but militarily justified act in the fog of war. The Germans, for their part, never deny using the ground immediately around the Abbey, but insist they honored their promise not to occupy the building itself until after the bombing. Captured Fallschirmjäger officers express a grim satisfaction. "You destroyed your own objective and made ours stronger." Years pass. The Abbey is rebuilt, stone by stone, through international donations, reopening in 1964. A new basilica rises on the old foundations, brighter and cleaner than before. In the Polish military cemetery at the foot of the mountain, 1,051 white crosses stand in perfect rows beneath the peak they conquered. Every May 18th, survivors and descendants gather to lay wreaths and sing the old songs. The bugle call that echoed in 1944 still sounds each anniversary. Wilkins returns once more in 1955, older now, with his wife and children. He meets Abbot Gregorio Diomer's successor and asks for forgiveness. The monk embraces him. "War is the sin," he says, "not the men who fight it." And so the story settles into history. A cautionary tale of how good intentions, flawed intelligence, and the brutal arithmetic of war can combine to destroy something priceless. The forgotten fortress, untouched by centuries of Italian sieges, Saracen raids, and Napoleonic campaigns, survived everything until one formation of American bombers, acting on a tragic misunderstanding, turned sanctuary into slaughterhouse. In the end, it was not air power that conquered Monte Cassino. It was the unbreakable will of exiled Polish soldiers who climbed through hell to plant their flag in the rubble. The mountain kept its ancient secret after all. Some things can only be taken the hardest way, by men willing to pay the ultimate price.